when we talk about the BTV, maybe it's useful. I have a slide that shows the map and kind of does add some
Oh,
context.
that'll be good. I'll just then. All right. Well, we are live out there on the interwebs. So I'd like to welcome everyone today to our Clean Start Perspective. We've been doing a couple Clean Start Perspectives focusing around the water issues and the solutions in California. Um, for those of you that don't know, the overwhelmingly majority of our water usage is in agriculture. So if we want to address our water issues, it has to address agriculture. So we've been focusing on the activities that are happening in the valley, specifically ones around Fresno State. And we've had some good discussions with the Center for Irrigation Technologies, with their Director of Education and Laura Ramos, and also Dr. Charles Hillier there. So I encourage you, if you really like the conversation that we're having today, to go check out those recordings. Now, Clean Start is supported by SMUD, Chico Start, Fresno State, the Wet Center, who we're again talking with today, Witten Law, Moss Adams, and River City Bank. All right, so I would like to welcome our guest today, Eric Hadden, Executive Director of the Wet Center at Fresno State. Eric Hadden has a history of working on projects in the Central Valley around water and agriculture, and has been a big supporting partner of Clean Start here for the past several years. We've gone down to the Wet Center and seen a lot of cool things that they've done, but so I don't butcher all of it, I'm going to let him introduce it and talk more about what they do, and then I've got some good questions.
Awesome. Well,
Eric?
Thomas, thank you so much for that introduction, and it's great to be with all of you this morning. And I do just want to start by, again, and we'll get into this as we delve more into the conversation, but I want to highlight what great partners you and Gary and Clean Start and the entire team have been for us in the Wet Center. And one of our keystone projects, the Blue Tech Valley, which we will get into a little bit later, but just a great team to work with, and you all are doing such tremendous work helping to promote the transition to clean energy throughout the Sacramento region and then collectively throughout the Central Valley as well. And so we're just so excited to be partners with you. But yes, as you mentioned, I am the executive director of the Water, Energy, and Technology Center, Wet Center, here on the campus of Fresno State. We are a business incubator and accelerator, really focusing in the areas of agtech, cleantech. We recently branched out into food for the first time, which we can talk about. But we are here, in the way that I talk about our center is really being at the intersection of business and academia, all for the greater economic development of the Central Valley region. One of our key objectives is to bring entrepreneurs to our region, introduce them to the resources, the connections, the things that will get them to stay here to start their businesses, and aid them in the growth of those businesses along the way. Because I believe that to really see a change in the economic conditions, not just of Fresno, but of the greater Central Valley region. And I want to talk a little bit about that too, because there are a lot of similarities geographically, depending where you go, whether it's 60 miles south or 60 miles north, the challenges look very, very similar. But we are here to bring these people, to give them the resources that they need to help them develop their businesses so that they can become that next great level of economic development for our region, which we so desperately need. Entrepreneurship here looks different than it does in other parts of the state. And one of the programs that CleanStart's involved with us is the Blue Tech Valley. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about what that means and the impact that it's had over the last several years. But entrepreneurship in this region of the state is often overlooked. Certainly, it's popular in the Bay Area. It's certainly popular in Los Angeles and in San Diego. But when you look at the Central Valley and you look at sort of the furthest ends of our state, the central portion of our state, it's often overlooked. And that's one of the great advantages that we have, is being able to connect these people with the resources and the expertise that they need to scale their businesses in areas that really need to see this type of economic growth. So, but yeah, certainly water is a big part of what we do as well, being in the Central Valley. I mentioned ag tech. Ag as a economic engine is absolutely massive in the Central Valley. In Fresno County alone, on an annual basis, it's anywhere between 8.5 billion to 8.4 billion, and that's just in Fresno County. That's not counting Kings County or Tulare County or Madera County, where those figures are very, very similar. And frequently we are jostling between the number 3 and the number 1 ag producing county with some of our neighbors, just depending on the year and the type of crop. And so, on the whole, it represents about a $50 billion industry for our Central Valley. So, with that in mind, a lot of the technologies and a lot of the entrepreneurs that we're looking to bring here to the Central Valley will cater to that ag market. Water, of course, is one of the most critical, if not the most critical, input in farming. And there have been a lot of challenges lately, both in terms of legislation that's come down from the state, which I'm sure has been touched on in some of the earlier conversations that you've had with Dr. Hillier and Laura Ramos at CWI, but also from climate change as well. We're in a period of big transition. And so you've got a regulatory environment that is not necessarily particularly friendly to ag, in combination with Mother Nature, who's giving us some challenges as well. This has historically been some of the most productive ag land for the last century, but that's changing. And we as a valley need to change as well. And entrepreneurship and ag tech can really help us in that area try to maximize what has been our pardon the pun, bread and butter for the better part of 100 years.
I think talking about how big, I guess, California's agriculture is and the people that you want to bring together on it, um, the Central Valley literally extends from, I think I'd say, Bakersfield all the way up to Redding, which is beyond Chico, with ag land and agriculture of all sorts. And I feel like most of them are, they're in need of water innovation. Um, So when someone does have, an entrepreneurial idea for addressing, water usage in agriculture, what are some of the first steps they should take if they want to see that idea move forward?
Yeah, so we run into this a lot. Entrepreneurs that start their journey with really no idea of what resources are available to them. And that's why we're so thankful when they find the Wet Center and they find us or the Blue Tech Valley, because we're able to refer these entrepreneurs amongst a network to the experts that are able to help them. It is not uncommon that we reputationally find that the Center for Irrigation Technology is a big pull for entrepreneurs. They've heard of CIT. CIT is, and I'm going to butcher the figures, but I believe it just celebrated its 40th anniversary. I think that's correct. But it had a reputation that far exceeded anything that we've ever done here at the Wet Center. And so a lot of entrepreneurs in the water space know of or have heard of CIT and come to CIT looking to do that independent testing. One of the advantages that we have at the Wet Center is that we're able to then work with these entrepreneurs to develop the business side. So CIT can focus on the testing and the product development, whereas we can help them with marketing, sales, connections, customer introductions, all of the things that an entrepreneur would typically need to accelerate their business. That's really where we can come in. And I think that's often one of the things that's sort of misunderstood about CIT and the Wet Center. How do the two integrate? It really is this great relationship where we're able to test and validate water products while also providing business expertise, marketing expertise, physical space as well. One of the things I didn't mention is that we have offices here on campus at the Wet Center where entrepreneurs can start their businesses. So really trying to give them a full suite, a complement of things that they would need in order to accelerate their businesses. But that is, I really do think, kind of our niche is we've carved out at this university, and it was intentional. We had a university president about 20 years ago that planted the flag and said Fresno State needs to be an institution that puts water at the forefront of everything that we do. Again, recognizing the connection between water and how valuable it is for ag. And that, I think, has paid off. Reputationally, we have a great position in being able to represent Fresno State as a place that you come to learn about water innovation, water policy. You come to educate the next generation about how important water is, excuse me, and the challenges that we're facing now. And that's one of the things that makes this so great. I know this doesn't necessarily touch on your question, but I try to emphasize this as often as I can because Fresno State is one of only 23 CSU campuses throughout the entire state of California. So having an institution like this right here in Fresno, in the Central Valley, is so critical because it does serve as this connective tissue for all of these people and all of these things and all of these resources to come together at one place. And I've been here for about a year and a half now. And in that time, I've seen delegations from the state of California, delegations from Romania, from Georgia, from all over the world who have come here to this university to sit and learn about water and water issues. We recently had a gubernatorial candidate who came to do just that, to spend time with us and talk about water, water policy and water innovation. And so we as an institution have made a point over the last 2 decades to really say, when you think of water, think of Fresno State. Now, granted, there's some other institutions in the CSU system that are doing great work in that space as well. There's some folks in San Luis Obispo. I'm not going to mention their names. We probably all know who they are. But it's really a great advantage to have one of these institutions in your backyard doing this type of work.
Yeah. So you guys got the California Water Institute, the Center for Irrigation Technologies, the Wet Center, and then Blue Tech Valley, all focused around bringing, I guess I'd say, like you said, like policy, existing farmers and people that are dealing in ag, new technologies, and trying to bring them to market. Now, we talk at CleanStart a lot about, how do you test your idea and get validation for your innovation, that it's actually going to work in the market, not that, it's really cool, but that someone's going to buy it. Now, farmers are notoriously fiscally conservative, I would say, and risk adverse. Because a small thing could wipe out or change their entire farming for a year that can have major fiscal impacts and on just not that year, but future years. How do you try to, navigate this space where you have typically risk adverse farmers with a lot of entrepreneurs that want to try some really cool stuff, and if I just can validate it on your farm, I might ruin it for 1 year or a half. How do you navigate that space between them?
Yeah, great question. And you're absolutely right. And one of the things I just want to take a step back and talk about the types of entrepreneurs that we bring to the Central Valley. So one of our flagship programs here at the Wet Center is called Valley Ventures. We are the longest running accelerator program in the Central Valley. We just completed our 8th cohort a year ago. In fact, a year ago today was our pitch contest. Thomas, Gary, you were both there. Thank you again for coming, and we'll see you in the fall. But we're actively recruiting right now for our 9th cohort, which will take place in September and run through the fall. When we look at the composition of the people who have historically been through the program and were in the program most recently, they're folks with amazing ideas and great academic and professional backgrounds. We had people from UCLA, Vanderbilt, Cal Poly, Stanford. We didn't have anybody from Fresno State, and that's something I'm working to change. But we had these great people and international entrepreneurs as well. We had a gentleman from Canada join us. We had a gentleman from South Carolina come out as well. One of the things that I like to make clear to them is ag is a different market. And Thomas, you touched on this. Farmers are notoriously risk averse, and they don't have time to bet the farm on something new and innovative that they're not going to immediately see a clear ROI on. This isn't software. You don't have the ability to iterate in a matter of weeks. This is seasonal. So if you screw it up, you've lost. And that is really so challenging. And it does, rightfully so, position the farmers in a different category. And I've had farmers tell me before, I have people approach me every single week with a new widget or a new technology that's going to do this or that. What I need to see is something that works. Show me that it works. And so that validation component is absolutely critical. And it's one of the areas where we have a really unique advantage. So Fresno State was built a century ago on what at that time was purely agrarian land. It was out in the middle of nowhere. Now, in that last 100 years, the community has sprung up literally around the university. So we have a 1,000-acre farm here on campus. But what 100 years ago was a 1,000-acre farm in the middle of additional farmland is now a 1,000-acre farm in the middle of neighborhoods and urban development and freeways and shopping centers and everything else. And the advantage of that is that the public has an opportunity to see on a firsthand basis as they drive down some of the most trafficked streets in our community, the things that we are growing and the technologies that we are using. Of that 1,000 acres, we have devoted 6 specifically to pilot site demonstrations. So taking these new and innovative technologies and giving them the space to fail, and if they do fail, or succeed, I should say, but if they do fail, they fail in a contained environment. And we're able to, without a significant economic impact to a grower, we're able to test and validate these technologies. Now, it is a working farm. I mean, the advantage and the objective of the farmland here in Fresno State is to make a profit. It's to give the students hands-on physical experience in what they will be doing in their careers in the ag space. But we're able to do it in a place that allows the entrepreneurs to collect a massive amount of data as to the success or failure of their product. And we can do it in an environment that is safe and contained and doesn't directly affect the bottom line of a farming operation. The other advantage that we have as an institution, and this goes back to the reputation that Fresno State has intentionally cultivated, is with the grower community. they turn to us to say, what are the new technologies? What are the new innovations that you're seeing that are on the forefront and horizons that you have validated, that you're willing to say, okay, you need to look at these. And that automatically puts these entrepreneurs at an advantage because they have the reputational backing of Fresno State to tell the grower community, these are things that we have tested, we believe in. And I will say, one of the things that we run into occasionally with entrepreneurs is they come to the university and they expect that if they do a test here on our 6-acre plot, they will receive a certificate with the bulldog stamp on it and the signature of the bulldog mascot, a paw print maybe, and you can use it on all your sales literature, and it's just this tremendous piece of selling material. That's not what we do. This is about scientific validation. So if you run a test here, what we are going to test for is a specific set of variables and data, and what will be provided to you is a report that shows that experiment was either accomplished or the experiment failed. It is not about endorsing products for the sake of endorsement. It is about providing the scientific data that will show not only the entrepreneur, but potential customers, really the world at large, this thing claims that it either does or does not do what it is supposed to. So I do think that's a big part of not only preserving the reputation of CIT and the Wet Center and all of the work that we do here, but really kind of letting entrepreneurs know at the forefront, this isn't simply about endorsing a product. That is actually the opposite of what this is. This is about scientific data leading that conversation. And if it works the way that you expect and the way that you sell your product, that'll be validated in the data that we provide you. And then you can go to the grower community and start there. But Fresno State, that is a significant advantage that we have, is the ability to test here on those 6 acres. I will say the other thing that we've done as well, and this has been very intentional. I've talked about 1,000 acres and only 6 of that is devoted to pilot site demonstrations. We have gone out of our way to cultivate relationships on the junior college level as well. There are a lot of JC institutions around here, College of the Sequoias, Reedley College, that are at the JC level that also have small scale working farms. And so to take these entrepreneurs and show them other potential sites for pilot site demonstrations other than Fresno State that are still local, that are drivable, that you can reach within 45 minutes to an hour of being based here at the Wet Center, for example, is a huge advantage. Yes, Fresno State is the leading institution when it comes to ag and farming, but those 6 acres can fill it very, very quickly. So to give entrepreneurs alternatives that allow them to stay local, stay connected to the growing community, and expose students at the JC level to these new and exciting technologies has been a key part of our mission at CIT and the Wet Center.
So how much of the 6 acres or the farming at Fresno State is dedicated to wine, to grapes and hops?
That's a great question. I don't know of that I don't know. I can find out. Clearly, that's the most interesting thing. And I mentioned the pitch contest that we did last year to celebrate Valley Ventures. We held that at the Fresno State Winery as well.
It was beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was a little warm on that day, and funny enough, it's getting warm now too. But that is a really kind of unique thing about our campus as well, is that we have an enology department and a viticulture department on campus here. We have an on-campus winery where the next generation of winemakers can come and hone their craft on campus. And yes, you can see the vines as you go up and down Barstow, which is one of the main thoroughfares here. But I'll have to find out on a percentage basis what that acreage represents for wine grapes.
And you start to see how, pairing it with food and adding food to your ag kind of makes a lot of sense. Now, also, let's talk about these farms, the entrepreneurs, they need investment. And just kind of in the energy area, it's the same. Whereas, you got to test something. It takes time. There needs to be a type of capital that really understands what agriculture innovations need. How have you tried to, connect that or educate investors or connect investors with the innovations, or is that type of capital just not one that you think works particularly well for agriculture innovation?
It's a really interesting question because it's something that we've been thinking a lot about here specifically, and trying to garner more investor attention in ag tech and what ag tech is doing. And because you're absolutely correct, I think that is one of the biggest pain points of entrepreneurs that we run into here at the Wet Center and who come through our programs are facing, as are most entrepreneurs, but really in ag tech, especially in clean tech. Where am I going to get the money? Where's the investment going to come from? And so a big priority for us has been educating the public and the investor community as to the types of entrepreneurs that we're seeing, the innovations that are here. Locally, I think there's an appetite for that. And we're just now scratching the surface. In fact, there are models at other universities, the Carlson Center, for instance, and some of the work that they've been doing at the Hot House in Cal Poly, where they have brought investors in, educated them individually on the types of innovations that they're going to see, and they essentially raise a fund and allow these investors to invest in these companies. And that's something I'm very interested in doing. And we're kind of in the early stages of looking into what it would take to do that here at Fresno State. We're also seeing regionally interest in the ag space as well. There is a VC firm that sprung up last year. They've rebranded now, the Reservoir, which is doing some really interesting things in the space. I think that we're all watching intently to find out how that's going to play out and whether or not the appetite is there. But it's definitely needed. I think one of the challenges that we have is that venture capital and the investment community has historically overlooked the Central Valley. And rightfully so. I mean, a lot of this is based on deal flow, and you're going to find deal flow in the Bay Area, and you'll find deal flow in Southern California. But looking to the Central Valley to find deal flow is typically very hard. There is a venture capital firm in Bakersfield that I was speaking to probably about 6 months ago. And the point they were making is we want to see a company that's going to have $10 million in revenue within the next 3 years. And for ag tech companies, that can be steep. And for a lot of the entrepreneurs that we're running into, that's really steep because they are very early stage. It doesn't mean it's not out there, but I think to answer your question, one of the things that we need to do is educate the investor community on these entrepreneurs, on the technologies they're bringing to bear, bring in the grower community to vouch for the fact that these are impactful technologies, and then really locally try to cultivate that interest in helping these entrepreneurs reach the next stage because some of this stuff really is game changing.
Yeah, you'd mentioned about like testing before, and I really wish that there was a way that, the Central Valley could explain to the investors that we're doing a lot of de-risking and testing of these technologies, that you can go somewhere and get, 100 companies that can promise you 10 million in revenue. And you can say, okay, there's a path. They probably won't do it because there's so much risk. They won't be able to do it because there's so much risk. But you can come to the Central Valley, come to the Wet Center, up to, to all or up to, Chico Start in Chico and see like, hey, we spent time validating, de-risking these technologies, testing them with customers and validating them so that your risk is lower. So, maybe it's not a $10 million company, but where it's a whole lot more likely to be profitable for you and generate a return. And kind of speaking of return, how do you kind of measure returns in the water space? Is it, because you have two things, you have reduction of cost, reduction of penalties with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, but you also have, can I increase my revenue by being able to grow more on it? And I think, one of the quotes we got from Dr. Hillier, he said it used to be that no one ever got fired for having too much water or too much, adding too much fertilizer to the crop because it was always like, okay, we're going to go bigger and, it's better to try to go bigger than cut these costs and not have enough. Um, but it sounded like that reality was changing. How are they how are the farms and entrepreneurs trying to connect with them, balancing these potential returns by either cutting cost or increasing revenue?
Yeah, I think right now, I think Dr. Hillier's right. The change that we have seen really over the last 10 years, and I think regulation has really driven this. And I'm sure either Dr. Hillier touched on it or Laura may have touched on it as well, but the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act has been a transformational piece of legislation. Typically, folks will use the term transformational in a positive context. This is transformational, not necessarily in the most positive context, or I guess it really depends on sort of where the lens in which you're viewing this issue is. Sigma was a piece of legislation that came out 10 years ago. We just hit the 10-year anniversary this year. And it is designed to mitigate the amount of groundwater that is being withdrawn from the aquifer. So in the Central Valley, we depend on the snowpack for surface water or groundwater. And because weather events over the last, well, really 20 years have been erratic, and they seem to only be getting more erratic recently, that surface water availability is becoming less dependable. We've had to shift to ground. In addition to the types of crops that we're growing here, a lot of nuts. These nut crops, almonds, pistachios, are water-intensive crops. So farmers have been going to ground, pulling out massive amounts of water from the ground. And if you look at, and we won't get into riparian rights in the history of California because it's a fascinating topic, but probably out of scope for this conversation.
Another podcast.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The technology that we are using now has really kind of, in a lot of ways, the regulation didn't necessarily keep up with the technology. So you have pumps that are able to withdraw 2,500, 3,000 gallons a minute from the ground, massive amounts of water to irrigate massive amounts of land, to irrigate massive amounts of water-intensive crops. And that forced the state to really look at how much was being withdrawn from the ground. The problem is when you are overdrafting from the aquifer and you're not allowing suitable time for recharge, you have what's called subsidence, where the aquifer collapses on itself. Once that capacity is lost, that's permanent. You will never recharge that aquifer to the amount of specific capacity it had pre-subsidence. And so it's really, and there are areas here in the state, in the Central Valley, if you go out to the west side, where you can see these posts that were planted decades ago, and you can watch the land literally sinking as a result of the subsidence and withdrawing from the ground. And so the state of California, in an attempt to make groundwater sustainable, allow us to match the recharge of the aquifer with what we are withdrawing from the ground past sigma. And so for one of the first times, farmers are having to seriously quantify what it is they're withdrawing from the ground. And this has caused a sea change in ag operations, in ag efficiency. There are various estimates out there that looking ahead, we will have to fallow anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million acres of farmland. And so it's really, again, transformational, but not necessarily in the most positive of contexts. And so water technology, to get to your question, right now it's really about water savings and water efficiency. What can I do with as little water as I have available? How do I maximize the efficiency of that water? And it doesn't necessarily have to contribute to greater yields. It has to allow me to maintain what I have been doing for the last several decades in terms of yields. I just need to use less of it. Fortunately, there are a lot of companies, I know we're talking about new startup innovations, but there are a lot of existing companies in the water space as well that are here in the Central Valley. A lot of Israeli companies, Jane Netafim, Jane was an Indian company, I think it's been sold again, that are in the irrigation space that have really devoted a lot of their product development towards that same problem. How do you maximize water efficiency in these products? Because that's the question of our time. If we are being limited, if we're not getting as much surface water because of climate change, and we're being limited on the amount of water that we can withdraw from the ground, what are we going to do? How do we maximize the water that we do have and make that more efficient? And that's the question of the day, because to fallow 500,000 to 1 million acres, I think it's one of these things where if you're not familiar with ag, the trickle-down effects, people don't really understand. You say, well, fallow it, what does that mean? It means to take it out of production. Well, that also means that you need fewer farm workers, you need fewer farm managers, you're not buying as many pesticides, you're not buying as much drip tape or filtration equipment or pumps. All of that has a trickle-down effect to the local economy here. So you're talking about an impact that would be hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in lost economic production in the Central Valley if this comes to pass. To that end, I will say there are people that are really taking some interesting and unconventional takes on what to do. So if this future is inevitable, or we do, because I think everybody's sort of clear that there will be a portion of existing farmland that will need to be fallowed if we are going to hit some of these regulatory requirements. So if you do that, what do you do with the farmland that's left? I was in San Francisco 2 weeks ago at Climate Week with an entrepreneur that's going to join our 9th cohort of Valley Ventures, talking about agrovoltaics. His name is Greg Rosen, and he's just started a company called Double Land. And agrovoltaics is an interesting space. People are thinking about that as an alternative use for farmland. His system, what makes it so unique, is that it's modular. It's movable. So non-permanent installation. You can either farm cover crop underneath the install, or you can pick the install up and move it. So move it over a different increment. That flexibility of a system like that is tremendous. So if you're no longer able to grow on the land, but you need something economically productive to do with that asset, this could be a great way to do it and permanently, non-permanently invade the land and allow you to go back at a time that you can do that and repurpose the farmland. The other interesting area that folks are investigating is mezcal, which is the primary ingredient in tequila. It's sort of like champagne. You can't call it champagne if it's not from the Champagne region of France. You can't call it tequila unless it comes from Jalisco in Mexico, but you can use mezcal, which is historically not a very water intensive crop. And so there are some growers that are very serious people. I mean, this isn't just being presented as a one off, but some very large operations and some very innovative folks in farming that are thinking that we in the Central Valley could become the mezcal capital of North America by doing this as an alternative. But it's a serious question. What do you do with this farmland? How do you maximize the water that you have now? How do you make it as efficient as possible? What are we going to do with the farmland that exists here? What alternative uses are there? And what's the economic impact of that going to be to the Central Valley long term?
Well, I'd say, welcoming Mexicans, their food and their drink has been one of the best decisions we've made ever as Californians. So I look forward to
It,
mezcal coming to here with
it's
avocados and things.
it's transformed our Central Valley. I mean, there's no doubt about
Yeah.
that.
I wanted to share this picture that I saw when I was in college about subsidence.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
and
There you go.
that's a pretty, someone talking about it in 1977,
Yeah.
showing it off. So you can imagine it probably has not gotten better. Um,
No. And I just will say, in additional, I'm a big fan of reading and articles and interesting. There's a book here over my shoulder called The Dreamt Land that's written by a gentleman by the name of Mark Arax, who is a local writer. He's written for the LA Times. He's written for the Atlantic. He did an article for the Atlantic. Oh gosh, it's probably been about 3 years ago now. But talking to folks in the water space here in the Central Valley, one of them who is a good friend personally, he's also a friend of the university. But really talking about the technology and the innovation in the water extraction space, in pumping specifically, and its ability to withdraw massive amounts of water, things that we never really could have anticipated or intended a century ago. And truly, the technology has outpaced the regulatory environment, but we're able to grow things in parts of California that we probably shouldn't. But the technology's enabled us to do that. So we have. But now I think as the environment is really starting to shift, and
mhm.
I mean the literal environment, we're having to make some interesting choices.
I want to go back to agrovoltaics because that is something that we've been kind of excited at CleanStart because the ability to incorporate, energy generation in land and still have it available for its initial primary uses, whether that's farming or other types of agriculture. We've seen some vertical two-panel, photovoltaics working as fences, and I guess whatever you call cow farmland.
That's your land. Yeah.
And then we've also seen some cool things come out of different universities of trying to put solar on farmland. And I think last time I looked it up, agriculture in the Central Valley uses about 7% of all the state's energy, which is pretty significant. Um, Now, are you so when he's looking at making these agrivoltaics, has he worked with the utilities around it, or is he just specifically focusing on the farmers? Do you know?
I think he's trying to decide what the best way to go about doing this. Right now, it's very, very early stage, which many of the entrepreneurs that we run into are. But I think he's investigating both avenues. He has a pilot installation in Marin County right now on some farmland, very small scale. So there he's just been working directly with the farmer, or as I guess in this case he's a rancher. But that is the question. Do you do it, ahead of the meter, behind the meter? Are you going to just simply power things on the farm? Are you going to try to work with utilities to send the power that's generated back to the utilities? All of that, I think, is very much up in the air. This is one of my least favorite expressions, but I'm going to use it anyway. It's early days, and so yeah, I don't know that he even knows the answer to that question yet. But I'm very curious to see what the solution is. And a big part of doing that is bringing him here to join this cohort to talk to the ag community specifically. What do you want to see from an installation like this? How, from a design perspective, can we make it work with what you're doing now? From a energy generation standpoint, what makes the most sense? Should we have battery storage? Should we be pushing it back to the utilities? How do we answer these questions? And that all goes back to one of your earlier points about validation. That really is what we're trying to do, to bring them here, to expose them to ag, to validate these products, and then to hopefully answer some of these design questions that will influence the future of this product.
Also show them that, like, the Central Valley, yeah, we're about ag, but down there you've got your, the the Bulldogs and the big stadium and the D1 events for college, which I know Sac State is, has the goal of eventually moving to D1 and bringing in some big things there. But there's a lot of things going on. You've been talking about water and ag, but then it comes into the water and energy nexus. One of the reasons that we focus on working with groups. Well, why you focus on working with groups like us? Because it's important and it's all coming together. What are either some technologies or some things that you're most optimistic about?
I really do think the agrivoltaics play is really interesting. I just think the need is there. And if we can educate the grower community, the ag community about the impact that these systems could have on their operations and adapting to the future, I think that's really interesting. There are a lot of products in the water space. I think you've had Joseph Gallegos on a previous
Hmm.
podcast before a video cast. He's an entrepreneur that I really enjoy because he's doing a lot of work in, again, trying to answer the question of how do you take water? How do you make water more efficient? Are there other implements that we can use to try to make water more efficient? The biochar space is really interesting. This idea of the biocircular economy and what do we do with the ag waste? That's fascinating as well. There's some institutes that are further north of us, Beam Circular in Stanislaus County, that's doing a lot of work in that space because part of this is what do you do with ag waste once it's generated? This is kind of and it does fit in the nexus of what you're asking about in terms of clean tech and clean energy. One of the things I want to make clear to people who don't understand the Central Valley and Fresno specifically is we also have some of the worst air quality in the entire nation and have for some time. We have failed to meet the EPA standards that were set in 1997. And we only recently, there was a state piece of legislation that was passed in 2003 to ban outdoor ag burning that just went into effect this January. And this is a very simple concept. You can't take ag waste and you can't set it on fire outside. And while that might not seem like a very long time, I was in high school when that was first proposed. I'm now nearly 40. So it gives you some indication of the time that it took and the pushback that we saw from something as simple as you cannot set ag waste on fire outside. And again, in a region that is plagued with healthcare inequalities, air quality issues, we're not doing ourselves any favors. So trying to figure out how can we be more efficient, not just in how we're growing these things, but what do we do with the waste that is left is a top priority for us. At least it should be. So the biocircular economy is something I'm really interested in because we need to figure out what to do with all of this ag waste. We can't set it on fire. That's not helping. It's certainly not helping the air. But what are we going to do with it? Are there ways that we can take almond hulls and repurpose it? There have been some really
Hmm.
interesting technologies in that space in terms of entrepreneurs that are thinking about potentially using it as fibers for clothing. Or there was another entrepreneur I met that was interested in powderizing it to try to turn it into injection molding material. But there's a lot of space, a lot of need for innovation in that space. We're just scratching the surface, but the inputs in terms of ag waste, that's bountiful. We have that in spades. Now the question is, what do you do with it, and how can you be productive with that?
Yeah, I know with all the partners that we talk to, agriculture, or even forest waste from, fire prevention or after fire, waste. It's trying to figure out what do we do with it and how do we make it something productive. I remember back in high school having clean air days and having football practice canceled and being lectured about the people in Sacramento canceling our football practice. Um, which was not an enlightening moment in college or in high school. Um, but yeah, so you guys have the Valley Invention Accelerator that's going to be coming up that people need to pay attention to. If you're looking in water, you have to look at, the entire, ecosystem from the California Water Institute, the Center for Irrigation Technologies.
There's too many acronyms. That's part
Well,
of
here's
our
the thing
Yeah,
is like,
sure.
it wouldn't be so bad
business.
if I didn't mix up all the words and go, Center for Water Innovation, California Institute Technologies, uh, um, Water Energy and Technology. That's the Wet Center.
That
I
one's
know that.
easy. Yeah,
Blue
I'm
Tech
biased, but
Valley
sure, right.
Consortium,
Yes.
which you mentioned Cal Poly there, but I believe they're part of your consortium, so they're an ally. And
I,
yeah,
they,
yeah,
Actually, if we can, because we've touched on it, we've sort of talked about it, but I want to draw some attention to the Blue Tech Valley and
yeah.
why that's important. And it's really interesting. We're here based at a university, and the just to back up a little bit, I mean, I think that we are living in a time right now where everything that is seemingly devoted to research or science is viewed in a negative light. It's waste, fraud, and abuse. It's too expensive. It's we gotta cut everything and dodge everything. And I will admit, I think there are always room for efficiencies in any types of organizations and certainly government. However, there are those programs that, if not for government investment, they simply wouldn't exist. And the Blue Tech Valley and the program that is supported by the Blue Tech Valley, which is something really innovative that the California Energy Commission has put together over the last decade, is one of those types of programs. It is designed specifically to bring new technologies and entrepreneurs to the regions of California, to develop these new technologies, to bring them to market, many of which straight away, we talked about the investor community, they could not be venture backed. It just economics don't make sense. But this program is allowing these entrepreneurs to continue developing their products because the environmental impact that they will have in California is immense. And not just California. If it'll work in California, it'll work globally. But it's because the vision of the CEC decided we need to do this in a way that we can spread out these innovations across the state, support all regions of the state, that we're able to talk today about what the Blue Tech Valley is. And so the Blue Tech Valley represents one portion of this program. They're called Regional Energy Innovation Clusters. There is one in the Bay Area. There's one in Los Angeles at the Los Angeles CleanTech Incubator. There's one in San Diego. And there's one here in the Central Valley that covers that territory that you were describing earlier, from Bakersfield all the way up to Humboldt. That is the Blue Tech Valley. And it is some of the leading institutions within that span that have come together to support these entrepreneurs and support these innovative clean technologies to help bring them to market and help California hit our ambitious climate goals, all of which are necessary. I mean, I talked about this earlier. You can believe or not believe in the science, but the reality is, in this region, we need these things probably more than other parts of the state because we are often overlooked and we have some problems like air quality, water availability, where when you talk about the impacts of climate change and what it means on underserved communities and health disparities, they're right here. The folks that I was talking to in San Francisco 2 weeks ago, and I love San Francisco. I went to school in the Bay Area. My father's from the Bay Area. There is a disconnect. These things are more academic. They're not lived. They're not, I can go right outside this university and the impacts of those problems are very, very clear. And so being able to bring these technologies and these entrepreneurs to the region of California that needs it most, that is most overlooked by the rest of the state, is massive. And again, if not for the state of California and the CEC investing in these types of programs, these innovations wouldn't happen.
Right.
So,
And
it's just so critical.
I don't think you can really harp on it too much. I was also at Climate Week and I went to some of the innovations in water discussion to talk with them, and zero of their presentations involved ag. And as we noted, ag, which is in the Central Valley, which is the BTV region, uses the majority of water, 7% of the energy. And if you want to talk about things that impact the entire state and everyone who, every single ratepayer in it, it's the food that's being developed, their access to water, and their ability to efficiently use energy. And I'd say, thanks to the, Blue Tech Valley support, CleanStart has been able to go from Humboldt down to to Fresno and talk with people about the opportunities that are in it and why, you can build a company right here because you have the people that are using it right here. You can validate it right there at the wet center. And the impact that has had in keeping companies here and growing them naturally here.
Right.
It becomes so much more real when you're connected with the stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the fantastic companies that we've seen come out of, the Wet Center and BTV, and, the growth that, the BTV support has had in building not just, the Sacramento ecosystem, but all the way up, I'd say, to Chico and Humboldt even has been important for, I think, putting a lot of our cities on the map and giving people the support they need, not to just do the technology and policy, but the validation and commercialization of it.
Yeah.
So I thank you guys for your support.
Oh,
So
absolutely. I know, Gary, you're chiming in there too. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I do think it's important to just highlight how impactful this program has been. I think I'm from the Central Valley. I was born and raised in Fresno. I did go away to go to school, but I came back, and I can say as a native Fresnan and a native Central Valleyan, I guess if you want to call it that, we often do feel as though we've been left behind by other parts of the state, certainly by the larger metro areas. And it's you sort of understand it. When you go there and you look at Los Angeles, I've been to Los Angeles probably more times in the last year than I have in the last 5. And you go to LA and you look at the built environment there and you go, yeah, no wonder they don't understand the problems that we have. There's nothing comparable in the metro area of LA to what we're talking about on the other
right.
side of the grapevine. And so you think about these things, you live a different life. Yes, of course, it's not top of mind. But the point is, we in the Central Valley, as a result of feeling as though we're overlooked, have often felt that we need to solve these problems by ourselves. And the challenge with that is that it probably takes a lot longer than it should because we are being so self reliant. But the program, like the BTV, has been so critical in allowing us to connect resources that exist up and down the central part of the state, up and down the Central Valley, and bring them together and bring them to bear. I touched on this earlier, but I do think it's interesting, and it's just an observation that people regionally in the Central Valley tend to think that the problem that exists here, I'm going to use Fresno specifically, the problems that we see in Fresno are uniquely our own and are not shared by our neighbors to the north or south. And you look at the employment data, you look at the economic data, you look at college attainment data, healthcare outcomes, they're the same. They're the same groups of people, it's the same types of problems spread throughout this valley of ours. And so these are shared issues. And if we can work together and bring all of us together to contribute, the outcomes are going to not only be more efficient, we'll see those innovations more quickly. So I think that does require a little bit of a philosophical change because we're not competitors, we are collaborators, and we all need the same things to happen. So yeah, the BTV has just been critical in bringing us together.
I'll also say
Well,
in the Central Valley here, we make hell of better beer and wine than anyone else, and that's from Fresno to Chico.
There you
yeah,
go.
there we
Absolutely.
go.
Gary,
Well, I do think it's important to emphasize, you talk about the $50 billion economy
Hmm.
of the Central Valley in ag. And when you look at all the statistics, where predominantly did the vegetable crops come from? Where does the fruit and nut crops come from? There's so many things the rest of the country depends on um, that are here. And, I think we need a bold vision to how you make that even more. And just a small part of that. We had the session with Gallegos earlier. The whole idea being buried irrigation. You
Mhm.
know, the inefficiency of ditch irrigation and the evaporation of the water there put the water right in the root zone. Now, here in the Big Tomato, if New York's the Big Apple, Sacramento's the Big Tomato, there's so much tomato growing here. And increasingly, as I drive around, they're using buried drip irrigation lines, just exactly what Lewis was talking about. And it's a it's a miracle because when you looked out on these crops before and all the ditch irrigation, the whole field was wet. So much of that is wasted. Now you look out and I can see there's a little bit of moisture at the end of the irrigation line, but the plants are growing like wildfire. I mean, this has really turned things around in this area to, I think, solidify this as a tomato growing area for a long time. Now, finally, it's making sense in a low water environment.
Mhm.
and soon we'll have
Yeah.
mezcal.
Yeah, right. Well, that's again some very serious folks talking about
Yeah,
that. I
well,
I
that
will.
that that and, what you were talking about on agrivoltaics. I mean, people should look at the thing that the perspectives we did with Emergy, which
Mhm.
is extracting electricity from the water flows in irrigation canals.
Mhm.
That was remarkable how much energy you could get out of that, and floating photovoltaics in the canals themselves. At any rate, great opportunity. Not as sexy as building the next Candy Crush, but
No, it's not a social media network. We're not going to compete with Facebook. I will say this though. One of the things that I've always known but then you talk to these people and you work with them. There isn't a community that is more interested in being sustainable and being efficient than the ag community, because they
Good.
are directly connected with the land and they appreciate that their ability to feed the world. And that's what this is. It's the capacity to be able to feed the world at a time when we're looking at the global population exceeding 8 billion, going to 9 and 10. How do you do that? The other challenge of our time is how do you feed the world's population? But there isn't a community that's more invested in using the land sustainably and efficiently than the ag community. And so I think at times there can be this sort of conflict between, and I'm going to use this, it's a pejorative term here, Sacramento, what Sacramento wants for the rest of the state. But the reality is that we can all work together to do this. The folks in the ag community care deeply about sustainability and about the future of these lands and how do we do it productively, but also how do we answer the challenges of our time, feeding more people while using fewer inputs and continuing to make California and the Central Valley a sustainable ag region for the next 100 years.
And defending Sacramento, the people you don't like in Sacramento are the ones that you guys voted for. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, any last kind of call to action, how people can engage with you and, where they can get involved in this?
Yeah, certainly. So if you want to learn more about the Wet Center and who we are and what we're doing, you can find us online at wetcenter.org, O-R-G. And that's a great portal and starting point for any of the things that we've talked about. You'll find my email address on there. You'll find our general mailbox as well. But if you've heard something today and you want a connection with the California Water Institute, or you want to talk to Dr. Hillier over at CIT, you can still visit wetcenter.org and email us, and then we'll point you in the right direction. And really, that's true of any of the topics we've covered. So if you want to talk to Greg, for instance, at Double Land, or Joseph Gallegos, I'm happy to put you in touch with them. The Wet Center, again, I view it as not just a point of intersection for all of these things, we're a point of connection as well for all of the resources and people that are doing this work. So send us a message and we're happy to connect you to whomever.
All right. I think that's a good one to leave it on. I see someone asking if you could talk briefly about the SGS conference.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. So the SGS conference, and this is interesting. I mean, we have rightfully so talked about energy and ag tech, which are really kind of the core components of what we do. But we are also involved in a grant with the California Office of the Small Business Advocate that is enabling us to engage with a lot of other community organizations that are working with entrepreneurs in the segments of entrepreneurship that a lot of folks would consider to be more traditional. So maybe you're starting a food business, or you're starting a clothing company, or a car detailing business, something like that, which would traditionally be outside the scope of what we're doing at the Wet Center. But this grant has allowed us to partner with other institutions in the Central Valley that are supporting these entrepreneurs. The Start Grow State Conference is a first event for us that we're hosting on campus here at the University Business Center on the 21st of May, starting at 12:30. And it is a celebration of all of the entrepreneurial activities that are going on in the Central Valley, from the work that we're doing in the BTV to the work that the Fresno Area Hispanic Foundation is doing to support food vendors, our SBDC office and what they're doing to support entrepreneurs. We're bringing all of those folks here to campus to have a afternoon of celebration that will be capstoned with the opportunity to give away $75,000 in non-dilutive grant funding from the California Office of the Small Business Advocate, CalOSPA. So that's a big first for us. Typically, we don't have the ability to offer such grants, but CalOSPA, again, is making that investment. The state of California, recognizing that supporting small business and entrepreneurship is so critical, has made that investment, and that'll be our capstone event starting at 3 o'clock on the 21st. So right now, we're going to have between 5 and 6. We're winnowing the field down now. We had a record number of applicants, but we're going to have anywhere between 5 and 6 people present and pitch for the opportunity to be our recommendation to the state of California to receive this grant funding. So we're really excited about that. But again, May 21st, everybody on this webcast is welcome. I'll be pushing out a link where you can register for tickets, but we'd love to see you on campus on the 21st.
We'll also push that out through our networks. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. First, I want to thank Eric Hadden for joining us today, and the Wet Center for donating his time and the chance to get to talk about all the cool stuff that we've done through them with Blue Tech Valley. Also, I want to thank our sponsors and our supporters. That's SMUD, Chico Start, Witten Law, River City Bank, and Moss Adams, and of course the Wet Center. And I want to invite people to our next Perspective event on May 29th. the startup rewriting the rules of power conversion. If that sounds wonky to you, it's going to get a little wonky, but we're going to also still focus on how this impacts the market. So don't miss out on that. And don't miss out on the 21st joining Eric at the Wet Center. Thank you for attending. Please connect with us and hopefully see you all in the future. All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.